My second son was just born. So I was a father of two. It was a Tuesday. And my wife sent me a WhatsApp video of him crawling. And it really it brought a tear to my eye, thinking, look, growing up I was extremely shy because of what I was experiencing and how life was and how the external world viewed me. And the council estate was in there, not the physical. There was no physical boundary, was there?
Yeah, well, yeah.
So when people see me, oh, he's loud, he's this, but really inside that shy kid had never disappeared. But that was my front to the world to say, look, the the demographic was very mixed. My course wasn't.
At what stage did you feel comfortable with going down a route that was so different?
To everyone around me, they thought I was regressing. I came downstairs, I was so excited. I said, look, Mom, got a deal. And she goes, don't worry about that, but you've left your mugs in the kitchen, in the sink.
Yeah.
And this young generation coming up are probably the most environmentally aware generation coming up, but yet they don't see the environment as a career option, but they're aware of the impacts of human activity more than any generation before them. Like, we take for granted you can just open the tap and drink water. And I can't even fathom that I can't do that, right? But these children, every time they drink water, which multiple times a day, they're risking their lives.
Ketan, so this is a really special conversation for me, and I don't think it's going to take too long for anyone who's listening to find out exactly why. The reason being is that from hearing your story and just knowing more about you, a lot of what you say and the way you are really hits home. And it's funny because whoever's listening might be thinking, different interpretations of what it means to hit home. And whatever they're thinking, they're probably right. Because firstly, you share the same surname as me, which already means that there's a huge chance that we're going to have a similar, understanding of our backstory or cultural upbringing, something that links us by at least our name. You also live very close, so it's very close to home physically. But, way more than all that, from the way that you communicate some of your messaging, that really resonates with the way that I've seen myself develop in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And before I even did my own podcast, there were many, many guest interviews that I listened to, whether it's celebrities or just individuals who seem to have found their purpose or, their calling, something that a mission that they're driven to achieve. Looking at the person you are now in terms of that change-driven character who's driven by such a fulfilling purpose, I was really surprised to hear what your backstory and child experiences were that formed who you are today. So where does this story start? Why are you now the person you are who sat in front of me today?
Well, this story started as far as back as I can remember in Leicester, when I grew up with lots of cousins, uncles and aunties. And my parents had recently been forced out of their place of birth in East Africa, in Uganda, by the Ugandan dictator Idi Amin. That's where my story started. But it was only when my family moved to South London and I started school that I realized that I see the world through a different lens. And my perception of the world was not the same as those around me, through their own experiences, cultural upbringings, family setups, and that type of thing. So I realized that I saw the world through a different lens very early on. And we had very little. So we improvised a lot in terms of, so leisure time, the parks were free. So I used to spend a lot of time, especially in the summer, with my mum and my little sister. So that's where I discovered my love of nature very, very early on.
Have you spoken to your parents and understood what it was like when they first arrived here? And in that story, have you seen how it may have impacted the sort of character traits that you've seen in them since you were born?
Absolutely. So when they first came over here, there was a lot of help. So the army had set up barracks to house the refugees, and there was a lot of help. Salvation Army, there was food kitchens, and so really sort of trying to integrate a population of people who've come from Eastern Africa to a very cold climate, not speaking English. It was only on the sort of the street level that with neighbors and people like that, there was hostility, extreme hostility, through a sense of not knowing, a sense of that they're coming over here, they're going to take your jobs, and they're going to, they're going to take off your culture, and basically, so there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment, which was then they experienced firsthand, but in the work situation, my mom in the factory found that she was very isolated, and then there was almost strength in numbers, really. So if my father is with the Caribbean, and Asian people, just naturally sort of congregated together because there was a hostile experience from the supervisors, the managers, and other people, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I reached my early adulthood that I actually embraced being different.
You say in your story that your parents were lucky to be deported and not murdered. Did that end up leaving them with a sense of luck?
It's difficult to say what they were experiencing because only recently started to speak to them about it. And both of them are very different in their views. My dad looks at Uganda extremely fondly still, whereas my mom feels lucky to have escaped and also almost like has shut that life out because life started in the UK. She talks a bit about her childhood, climbing trees and eating fresh fruit and stuff like that. Whereas my dad would go into a lot more detail of what it was like growing up, the things he used to do, things he used to be into, not just telling me, but also telling my children. So there was initially in Leicester that sort of whole community whereby a lot of people had come from Uganda. So there was that sense of unity that we're all going through the same thing at the same time, right? But when we moved to Plumstead, we were the only Ugandan Asians, right? So there was an Indian community, a very small Indian community, but they were all from one particular village in India. We're like 2 generations removed by now. I couldn't identify with anyone because no one actually had been through what I'd been through. And my dad always, and even some of the words we use when you speak Gujarati are Swahili words, right? Other Gujaratis don't understand that because if they're not from East Africa, they wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
So it's a subculture that was created.
And moving to South, again, something that I've heard you say that your younger years were hard.
Extremely, extremely hard because we were the only Asian family on our estate, and it was hostile. We used to most days get a bloodied nose, spat at, and it was a bit like I was called the P word every day, every single day, or but ding ding. It was the norm. Racist graffiti was on our front door, and I almost became immune to it. But as a small child, I actually used to be very fearful because the windows used to get broken a lot and stuff like that. And my dad used to work shifts, so it would only happen when he wasn't in. So they would not see his car there. So these are when the teenagers, whatever, and teenagers seem formidable as a child. To look at teenagers, they seem very formidable. We'd do these type of things, have a few drinks, and then smash our windows and stuff, right? So I didn't used to sleep well because every noise that happened, I was, it was when me, my baby sister, my mom were at home, and it was hostile. It was hostile. In fact, one of my earliest memories was actually being beaten up by a lady. So I was playing conkers outside school with a friend of mine. All of a sudden, I was on the floor, and the woman, I remember she looked down at me, she spat at me, she goes, "Told you don't play with these packies," to her son. You'll catch legacies, and just left me there. And I was like 7.
Wow.
And I got beaten up by my so-called friend's mom. Then when I reached about 10 or 11, 12, that I started to go to the youth club. My parents bought me a BMX bike, and then I started to sort of form friendships with mostly the Caribbean kids. And then because of my association with them, I was almost left alone. So that, yeah, it was difficult. And then for me it actually it made me feel inferior because it wasn't just in school. I'm sorry, it wasn't just on the estate. I'd go to the school. In school, I went to St. Margaret's. It was a Catholic school, and again, no Asians, and the teachers spoke perfectly well English, but they would talk extremely slowly to me, and they said, "Do you want like come right up to my face and stuff?" Then I started to disbelieve in myself. I started to almost hate my skin, thinking that like I'm inferior because I was told all the time, every day, you're the same color as shit. I can't think of anything positive apart from summer holidays in Leicester or Coventry, whereby Coventry was very multiracial, and all the kids used to play out. There was not. It was really alien to me at first. Black, white, and Asian kids used to play out. Leicester was just like an Indian enclave, and then I'd go back to my estate after that 6 weeks, face the hostility. So childhood is like that. Even and then I was always interested in environmental things without even knowing it, right? I used to be fascinated by the natural world, invertebrates, the Latin names and stuff like that. But I was a secret nerd. And when I went to see a careers advisor, um, when I was, mid-teens, and I said, look, I want to do something because it was a big thing about acid rain, the Chernobyl disaster, and all of that. And I said, it's something I want to do, and how do I get into that field? And her answer, she looked at me, she said, doesn't your family own a grocery store or anything?
Wow.
So that was a perception at the time.
The example that you gave of the teacher, talking really close to your face, and even the careers advisor, do you think that it was done out of malice or ignorance?
Ignorance.
Yeah.
Trying to sort of, basically almost felt pity on me.
Yeah.
But I didn't need that pity. I think I've developed this because I had the victim mentality for so long, and then something changed in me whereby I didn't want to play victim anymore, right? So now I actually use my formative years and what happened there as to propel me.
Yeah.
To actually, it's motivation for me. I didn't know it at the time because I was desperate to fit in. Most kids are, right? And and even when I did start to fit in, there'll be it wouldn't be as outright, but it'll be like, oh, it's a funny smell. You smell funny, or why does your mom wear why does your mom wear bed sheets? And
Yeah.
there's always a curry smell about Indians, and oh, but you're all right. You don't smell like the other Indians and stuff like that. It'd be indirect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but it still carried on.
There's something that I read of yours, and it's the way you phrase it that's really striking. You say, you mentioned a number of times, due to my unshakable belief in my ineptitude, and you said that as a result of that when you reached your adolescence, you kind of rebelled and those fears manifested. What did you mean by this?
I basically did everything I wasn't supposed to. I
Mm.
fell into the wrong crowd just in order to fit in, and I started to live a lifestyle that very, very much went against what I was taught within the household. Started doing things I shouldn't have. Involved myself in petty crime. Um, to me, it seemed the norm because around me, outside of my household, that's what was going on. So I didn't actually. I thought that this was how it was, right? Um, and so I just had a series of failures, academically, in terms of relationships, in terms of probation services, teachers, neighbors, the law. I was not. It was a self a detrimental prophecy that I created for myself at the time, and I just kept on going in a downward and downward spiral, and I couldn't actually see a way out until there was a pivotal moment in my life whereby I saw a way out. I saw friends that were incarcerated. Um, I was involved in some work myself in terms of probationary work. Um, Being back in the outdoor setting reignited my passion for the environment. During one of these sessions, I discovered a colony of great crested newts, which is an endangered amphibian.
So your that natural inclination and interest you had, and then the work you did where you were exposed to helping clean up the environment, that was purely by a chance.
Chance? Well, not really,
Yeah.
because nothing's by chance.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the surface, it was by chance, but it's nothing's by chance. So that then made me think, right, I'm in my late teens. I still want to go down the academic path of something environmental because this was now the 90s. Again, the environment wasn't a thing then, and it wasn't. My cousins were following sort of academia or already probably graduated, and I'm still now trying to get into college to do GCSEs. And they embarked on, you know, typical sort of medicine, accountancy, the careers that were expected them, and they're happy, and you know, but mine was so what when I wanted to go into the environment, it was when I told my parents, they were like, "What is that?" But they were just glad that I just wanted to go back into an academic setting, so they were quite pleased that, but I didn't know what it was. They didn't know how to explain it to people when people were saying, "What's your son do?" And then my dad said, "I don't know. He's at uni." You know, I don't know what it does, something to do with the air or something like that. So that's why I was trying to explain it to them. But without them knowing, they actually instilled this passion for the environment. My mum did particularly because we didn't have a garden. We used to have a balcony, but we used to spend a lot of times in the park. We used to, you know, because we didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of toys, so we used to collect small crustaceans and different invertebrates, and then would release them, and that was then when I thought, well, okay, so that eats that or that lives here, and what, you know. So then I started reading about it, but my mom ignited the spark, and a lot of it's to do with culture because, you know, my mom would say you got to be very careful. You mustn't hurt it when you pick it up. You got to release it back exactly where it was what it wants to be with its family. So you can't pick it up and then release it in another garden and all these little things, right? So I got very much into nature, and that's actually cultural because we believe the earth is our mother,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
you mustn't damage it. So I would look at it, get my magnifying glass out, then look at the Latin name and, you know, subspecies and what phylum it belonged to, and then release it. And I was so passionate about it as a kid. And it was nice to get away from the estate. We'd go to the common or the woods. My sister would be in a pushchair. She was very young, so she probably doesn't remember it so much. But for me, it was some of my best times.
You always talk really highly about your mum. It's something that, you know, I've seen her name come up many times when you're talking about your own sources of inspiration. And even now, I didn't realize how much of an influence she had on, you know, your environmental interest. But there's one other person that you also mention who was one of your only sources of encouragement that you had through schooling. And you mentioned this guy called Dr. Theo Cronje. What was his role in your early years?
In all honesty, Dr. Theo Konja actually didn't tell me anything that my dad wasn't telling me. But for it to come from someone outside the family, it kind of hit home, right? He saw a potential in me that I didn't see in myself. I really didn't see that in myself. He's the one who encouraged me to actually apply to university. But he went out of his way. He was the head of science department. And even at this time, so even though I'm in college, I'm still very easily swayed into the wrong path. And he would go out of his way to come and find me saying, look, you're supposed to be in chemistry right now. Why are you hanging around in the corridors, or why are you in the common room? So he definitely saw something in me I really didn't see myself. You know, being the head of science, being from Ghana, he'd experienced a lot of the things I had as well, but from a different way. But, you know, whether it would be over or not so over prejudice, right? But he became the head of the science department, and the obstacles he overcame, not even being born in the UK, right? And he told me some stories what he'd been through, and he just really, really, really pushed me. He is, you know, he's my uncle, right? He's not just Dr. Theo Konje. He's actually my uncle, and yeah, he changed my life, and he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I really didn't, and I'm glad he did. So, and then when it came towards the end of the A levels, and he was like, you know, right, you need to start applying for university. University, that's a big word, man. I don't know anyone who's been to that. No, that's 3 syllables. Who's uni? This is cool for me, my big college and that. But he's like, no, you need to apply for university, and I did, and you know, I got several offers, conditional, pending results, right? So that was a shock, and then by default, I chose the one nearest to my house because I felt most comfortable, you know, being in my area. I mean, I could have actually gone back to my hometown of Leicester, well, birth town of Leicester, but I chose to stay there because I felt that I could still be a student at university, still do what I needed to do around the area, through comfort and stuff. But when I went to uni, again, it opened my eyes a lot more to different people, and I actually realized people are people, right? And the council estate was in there, not the physical. There was no physical boundary, was there?
Yeah, well, yeah.
It was mostly in there. So I was And that's when I started meeting people from Europe, from Americas, mature students, and people from so many different walks of life. But I struggled to fit in because when I first started uni, I had I was different. So I did these were gold teeth. That
Oh
one
yeah.
and that one, and I used to talk like this and smile like this because I felt like I didn't want to. I wanted to blend in, and at the same time, up until this point, all of my dealings had been with authority figures where I'd been in trouble, where these lecturers actually wanted to help me. I
Yeah.
didn't even have that in college because they disliked me for a reason. But now I'm trying to change and I'm at uni. I felt that they're out to get me almost. Like, why they been so nice and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I built up a barrier. As soon as the lessons were finished, I'd go back to my area or whatever. It was in the second semester I really started to integrate myself into the university life, and some of my best, friends that I'm probably got for life were formed in at university from very different walks of life, and it was life changing for me. But Theo actually planted that seed, and it physically encouraged me. He was going above and beyond, and there was nothing in it for him.
Yeah.
Like other than he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
It's amazing because, I've done many of these podcasts now, and, it's so frequent that you hear that there's this inspiring figure who, for a reason that might not be clear to yourself, decided to help, and it gave you that sort of desire, or it filled you with that purpose to want to do the same back to the next generation.
Absolutely. And not only that, so when I was going for my degree and there were times where I was struggling, biochemistry, I found it hard. But I thought, I can't let Dr. Theo down. I can't let my mom down. I've got to do this, man. I'm here now. So I've got to do this. So that was motivating me. I can't let them down. They believed me. They want me to do so well. And as I said, my father was just shocked that I was in uni. And that's the only time when on my graduation day, he's actually said to me, I'm proud of you, that you did it, man.
I'm going to slightly go off field because it's something that I read into this recently. So Phil Stutz, who, if you've heard of him, there's a film on Netflix, there's a documentary on Netflix called Stutz, and he's a psychiatrist to a lot of celebrities, including Jonah Hill, who did the documentary on him. And one of Stutz's messages in that, or one of his key teachings, which he does with a lot of his clients, is that we all have this part X. And part X is like the antagonist in our film. So it's the same thing that, Tim Grover talks about people's dark side when he talks about celebrities who have a dark side. It's the enemy that holds us back from, pushing forward. What is your part X?
Look, so everyone's got this part X, right? It led me down a rebellious path, but at the same time, it didn't. There was my grounding, I think, was always within me, and that's what really stopped me from going. Like, I could have gone complete. I mean, probably by most standards, probably by Asian standards, certainly, I was completely off the rails. But it could have been a lot worse. There was something that was really preventing me from going, being worse or something. There was something in me that always said this felt wrong.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel wrong at the time,
Yeah.
and sometimes it didn't even feel wrong later that day. But maybe a few months down the line, I think, okay, that probably wasn't cool, and it was going against everything that I'd been taught. So everything I'd been taught was in there, but I almost pushed that aside. And now I embrace that more than this side. That this side is always probably going to be there. And I think everything happens for a reason. And that had to happen for me to appreciate the things that I now do.
I've heard you mention that, and something that I can really relate to is, the power of getting outside of your comfort zone. And one of the things that again stood out to me that probably came as an initial surprise was that for you, getting outside of your comfort zone also involved, speaking on stage. Were you a shy kid, or even as a teenager?
Growing up, I was extremely shy because of what I was experiencing and how life was and how the external world viewed me and stuff like that. And as a teenager, I probably became the opposite, but only within my peer group or with teenagers, other teenagers. But if you put me in a setting that I wasn't comfortable with, or with adults, again, I'd become very withdrawn and very introvert. So it really depends on the setting, because when around adults, I found myself mostly in trouble, right? So I'd already have my guard up thing. So, I didn't actually Yeah, so there's been different facets. So from extremely shy to extremely probably out there, but that was actually a front. So when people see me, oh, he's loud, he's this, but really inside that shy kid had never disappeared. But that was my front to the world to say, look, I'm not the kid that you used to know, and I'm about it now. But really, I still was that shy kid.
There's a really good quote by Cus D'Amato, who's a, I hope I said that name right, but he's one of the boxing trainers to, the likes of Anderson and also Mike Tyson.
Oh, wow.
The difference between the hero and the coward is what they do with their fear, because they both feel it.
Absolutely.
Right.
I fully concur with that. There's always a fear. Now, whether you actually choose to follow the fear or actually embrace it, right? So you can either run from the storm or you can run into the storm. The choice is going to be yours. If you run into the storm, initially it's going to be very difficult, but then you'll look back, you'll come out stronger. But if you're running from the storm, you're going to be constantly running, looking over your back. So you have to actually face your fears head on, whether they be fear of speaking, fear of putting yourself out there, anything new. You're going to have a certain fear, and that actually the fear now excites me. I look for things that make me feel fearful. If I'm not a little bit scared, it's not really the one. If I'm too comfortable, even if it's new and it still seems too comfortable, it's not for me. I've got to have a bit of fear for me to I've got to embrace that fear, and with open arms. I love to be in a situation, but things scare me.
So in 2013, you started Buckingham Futures. The thing that draws me so much to this part of your story is that I used to work in banking, right, for 7.5 years, and it was a really fascinating part of the banking because we were helping structure loans that made raw materials get sold, right? So again, with helping the world move in the sense of through the selling of like proper goods. But even then, after 7.5 years, I reached this point where it wasn't fulfilling something within me. And I took a huge risk. And I say huge risk in the sense of where I was in terms of my world environment and my social circle. That was considered a high risk by moving to China and then trying to take a role which was a lot more about my own independence and creativity. But again, with a fear of what am I stepping into? You did something very similar with Buckingham Futures. And something that I've come to realize from my story is whether people have reflected on it or not, for them to take what's considered, a relatively big risk within their understanding of their environment, it normally can be pinpointed to a moment. So I could pinpoint my moment when it happened to me. When did that happen on your side?
I could pinpoint my moment too. And in terms of people around you, this is when I realized that you can't listen to the naysayers. They may mean well, because they will think that this is impossible, because it may be impossible for them. But what my moment was, so WhatsApp had just started. My second son was just born. So I was a father of two. It was a Tuesday. And my wife sent me a WhatsApp video of him crawling. And it really it brought a tear to my eye, thinking, look, she sent me a video of him crawling, but I'm not actually going to see him crawling myself till Saturday, because I felt like a weekend dad. I'm working in the city. I'm leaving in the morning. Kids are still in bed. I come home late at night, 8:30. They're already in bed. I don't actually see them awake. I felt like a weekend dad. So that's when I said, I'll take a huge pay cut. I'm head of division, great company, great job. And I just wanted to do the school drops. And my wife's telling me, she dropped them and he painted this and he did that. And I'm like, I'm missing out on this. And my memories of growing up, my parents were working so hard. They had to. The first generation immigrants, right? So they were working all the hours God sent. And I didn't want to repeat that cycle. So that's when, I had no previous experience of running a business. But that's when I decided I'm happy to, until they're actually in full-time education, I'm going to, if I can cover myself the bare basics. Problem was, I recently bought a house for my parents, so I had 2 mortgages to walk away from everything. So then I strategic plans for the following 6 months. I had enough savings, but it meant I had to sell my car, and to everyone around me, they thought I was regressing. To give a corporate sort of job up, to go and set up in a box room at my parents' house as a one-man band, everyone saw that around me saw that as regressing. So I stopped talking about it.
Mm.
It was almost like, even my dad used to say, well, you had a good job and you was, you're a supervisor there or whatever. And now you're just here every day. Are you looking for a job? I'm like, no, I'm not. And then, I took the plunge. It was scary, but exciting at the same time, equally.
It's amazing because going back to this topic of our own upbringing and the influence of our cultures, the Asian community, and it's not just limited to that, but obviously speaking from the experience of coming from that South Asian background, right? There are careers that are considered the way to go.
You're deemed successful if you're in one of these careers, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And, part of the story, or, a bulk of the story is driven by the idea of these are stable, well-respected careers. The previous generation had taken the risks that they had to set us up with something that allows us to
pursue these careers.
Right. At what stage did you feel comfortable with going down a route that was so different?
In terms of the sector or in terms of setting up the business?
Two-part question. So firstly, in terms of the sector, and then obviously the knock-on effect of...
Well, the sector is something I was very passionate about, right? So, and even during my bachelor's degree, I realized that the demographic was very mixed. My course wasn't. It wasn't a course. The environmental sector didn't attract minority students, not just Black or Asian, but also those from low incomes. And then, but the demographics of the university were very mixed. Again, when I did my master's degree, University of Hertfordshire, very mixed university, but not the master's in environmental planning and management. I was the only visible minority. So that's where, again, I felt that almost a sense of being alone, because but it was something I was so passionate about that almost didn't matter to me. What if they don't look like me, or they've probably not had the same upbringing as me, they've probably come from, sort of private school education or whatever. I was so passionate about what I was studying, it didn't matter. But in terms of setting up Bucking Future, so I'm not from a business background. My parents are not, my mum was a factory worker. My dad was working for London Transport. He's also worked in factories. So to them, change is scary. And setting up a business was very scary for them. For me to actually walk away, because my dad, even a couple of times, so over 16 years where I worked in the corporate world within recruitment, I had 3 different jobs. And each time I moved jobs, my dad was extremely upset with me. Said, like, why didn't you stay there? If they didn't get rid of you, why are you leaving?
Yeah.
He was so upset. And he was even more upset when I then decided to set up Buckingham Futures. So, because his mindset is stay there and just show them, just keep working hard. The longer you've been there, the more credible you are. And to leave a job without actually the business is still operating. Why have you left? So that was really difficult, not having any encouragement. And although my mum said, look, it doesn't matter what you do, I will support you, but she didn't have a business mindset. So I couldn't talk to her about, I'll give you a classic example. So when, sort of 4 or 5 months in, I made my first deal. I came downstairs. I was so excited. I said, look, Mum, I've got a deal. And she goes, don't worry about that, but you've left your mugs in the kitchen, in the sink.
Yeah.
I'm like, Mum, I've made a deal. She goes, well, wash up first, and then we'll talk about it. Like, she didn't get it. She didn't get my excitement. She was happy for me being happy, but I don't think she gets that world.
Yeah.
She still doesn't, but she knows that I'm happy, and it's changed not just my life, it changed the life of my immediate family, my external family, my extended family, and also the fact that I can give back to the community, and I do regular events for site restoration operations in India. I'm building a well in Uganda. So the fact that I've set this up is changed my life, and I've been featured in lots of publications where I share my environmental journey and my passion for the environment. If you ask someone when I go to schools and colleges, how do you imagine someone who's within the environment? What do you think? Either they'll say David Attenborough, or someone just wearing hemp clothing and tying themselves or gluing themselves to roads and that. But the environmental sector is much more vast than that. So the perception is not there. And this young generation coming up are probably the most environmentally aware generation coming up, but yet they don't see the environment as a career option, but they're aware of the impacts of human activity more than any generation before them. So this is why I'm trying to bridge that gap.
So actually, just to clarify, so Buckingham Futures is like an environmental health recruitment company, right? One of the things that I love that the company stand for is to dismantle systemic barriers that contribute to this underrepresentation. And it's interesting because I've had a few different guests from, the performance sector, so actors, musicians, and CEOs who are female and grown up in a place where maybe females aren't seen to be in those leadership roles. One of the things that it often boils down to is this idea of underrepresentation. In football, it's still talked about how there's a lack of black representation, and especially not even talking about South Asian representation when it comes to being specifically once they've got hired. How are you looking to actually fill that gap within what you
The
say is
environmental
this,
sector.
yeah, where not even the hiring stage, but beyond that, in actually building this representation, or do you feel it's underrepresented?
Very much so. So there was been studies. I think there was a study by The Guardian in 2021 where only 4% of decision makers within the environmental sector are of minority backgrounds. But what the environmental sector has got a huge shortage, right? So there are underrepresentative groups that are not being reached out to. They're not seeing the environmental sector as careers for them. So it's then up to people that are the decision makers to actually then bring through and push through the new generation of environmental professionals who will in turn become leaders. So whether they be female, whether they be from disabled backgrounds, from minority backgrounds, from low income backgrounds. So there's lots of people, there's untapped talent out there. And as I said to you before, this is probably the most environmentally aware anyone's ever been in terms of the young generation. Generation X and Generation Z are the most environmentally aware, but they're yet not pursuing, certainly the minority groups or those that are underrepresented still continue to be underrepresented. So this is where I host events with schools and colleges, and actually go to speak to people about environmental careers. I'd get my team involved. I get external speakers who are actually within the environmental sector from visible backgrounds so these are not what typically someone who has an interest in environment may not see anyone like that in the mainstream. I work very closely with Harrow College. Every year we do an event where the students have to design environmentally friendly products. Then we go around judging them. So the interest is definitely there. Now then, hopefully the type of things I'm doing will then encourage them to, when they do progress into their careers, look at the environment as a career, because they think, well, actually, something that I can do, something I'm passionate about, and follow their passion. Then in time, they will be the decision makers. They will be the leaders. And then it will represent society at large.
One thing is you're really passionate about mentoring. So you come across an 11-year-old version of yourself, an 11-year-old Ketan Dattani now who, let's say that they've come from a similar background, not ethnically, but in terms of their upbringing, and they've got a similar outlook on the world that an 11-year-old version of you would have had. What do you say to them in terms of what a mentor could do for them?
A mentor is undervalued. So without knowing it, Dr. Theo Concha was actually a mentor, wasn't he? I didn't really sort of name him as a mentor at the time, but he was a mentor. Now, mentors can be good or bad. Mentor is someone that you aspire to, someone who you want to be like. Right? So if someone kind of encouraged me at the time, whether it be careers advisors or a teacher, showed me the path, because I just couldn't really see a way. I didn't even think it was a thing, like a career within the environment, right? There was no Google then. You'd have to go to the library and get encyclopedias and stuff like that, right? So I think I would have channeled my passions at a much earlier stage, and I would have probably not deviated as much. But then everything happens for a reason, and even then the deviations, or the different paths I've gone down, have made me the person I am today. So I don't regret it. You can't join the dots looking forward. You can only join the dots looking back. So whatever happened for a reason. But if I had the right person guiding me, I would have made less mistakes. It's probably like, the analogy I would use, if you're trying to drive a car but didn't have a driving instructor. So if someone says, here's the keys and here's a car, right? Probably have a few crashes and eventually you will learn. But if you had a driving instructor and you're spending time with that person and he's showing you how it's done, would be the equivalent of a mentor. That's the way I look at it. And if I had someone who'd been through it, and had been through a similar path and could show me that this is the path, this is what you could do, and these are the options that are open to you, it would have streamlined the process, and I would have got there a lot quicker.
Where do you think this desire to give back to the next generation or give back to the youth that are coming up comes from?
My mum.
Hmm.
My mum. Because even when we had very little, she always wanted to give something to others that had even less. So, when we were sort of getting things from jumbo cells and Salvation Army was giving us handouts and stuff like that, she would always give stuff to homeless people. She'd always feed feral animals around, stray dogs, stray cats. That she always, even when we had little, she'd always give a little from what she had. She'd always send money to India. She'd always give to charities, and that's where it stemmed from. She always wanted to do stuff. She started to condense her hours in the factory, or no, in fact, sacrificed her hours in the factory so she could come and teach kids in my school to how to make things from paper, from garlands and flowers, from tights, and she used all recycled materials to make things. She's very good like that. So she always wanted to give either her time or give whatever little she had in terms of food, money, and I think at the time it used to annoy me, because thinking like, we don't have much, right? Why are you giving it away?
Yeah.
But as I've become an adult myself, I feel a real sense of satisfaction by giving something, but not expecting in return. Tree planting and food distribution work, work with adults with learning difficulties, because I feel, from a selfish point of view, I feel a real sense of satisfaction, more so than making deals. I get a real sense of satisfaction in my heart that I've done something that put a smile on that person's face, therefore put a bigger smile on my face and a smile on my heart.
Yeah.
So and I do things selflessly, and I make time, and I kind of prioritize things that are important to me, and giving my time to others is a priority to me. There's some non-negotiables in life, and that I set in my own life, and that's one of them.
And one of those things is, I hear that you have this plan, which is in motion, to build a well in Uganda.
Absolutely.
Why did you choose this specific time of your life, and also why a well?
So 1972, my parents were expelled from Uganda. 1973, I was born. Quick maths, 50 years ago, right? So my way of celebrating being on this earth for half a century is to actually give back to the community that I've never been to, but I will be going to actually do the open the well. It is to give back the community that kind of made me the person I am without me actually seeing it. But that community had a huge impact on who I am today, and because of who my parents are, who my grandparents were, therefore who I am. So my dad was born in a relatively remote place in Uganda. And I did some research, and there are parts just outside of the main hub that still don't have clean drinking water. There are schools that are operating without running taps. There are maternity wards that are operating without running water in 2023. So in 2022, I decided that next year, meaning this year, I want to actually change something, and I want to leave a legacy. But I don't want to leave a legacy with a plaque with my name on it for any clout, but actually give something. And what better gift can I give to someone than clean drinking water? Which will mean that people don't have to go and drink from the river, because this is where the source of there's the community that we're building the well in is 300 families that all the source of water is for river, for drinking, for bathing, for washing. It's the river. Which means a lot of the children can't go to school because of the journey to and from the river. So they will be able to attend school. That will then change the time in terms of disease prevention, having clean drinking water. Like, we take for granted you can just open the tap and drink water. And I can't even fathom that I can't do that, right? But these children, every time they drink water, which multiple times a day, they're risking their lives. They could get malaria, and there's so many other things that they can think. So that's why I thought that it would be a great way for me to actually go and discover firsthand what Uganda's like. It's a part of my legacy, ancestral legacy, and to make a difference to the community that my father was born in. I can't think of any better way of spending my 50th birthday, really.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And there's this book called Traveling While Black by Nanjala Nyabala, if you've heard of it. And one thing she says in there, which has really struck me and probably adapted my mindset as well, is that in helping people, it shouldn't be about feeling bad for them, but it should be about wanting them to experience the same fullness that you are striving to feel yourself,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And it's,
It's not like you don't want to pity someone.
yeah,
I've been pitied my whole life, right?
yeah.
You don't want to pity someone, but you want to give people the right tools to be the best version of themselves. And the basic is clean running drinking water. Like, as I say, like it is something that we just in the Western world take for granted that it's there, but it's something it's not the case in the rest of the world, unfortunately.
You've become such an ambassador in the space of, environmental health, and you've talked about the different activities you do beyond the recruitment. What is your underlying ethos?
My ethos is I'm a student of life, right? I'm never going to know everything. And I'm going to learn something from everyone, irrespective of age, gender, ethnicity. I'm still going to learn. I learn stuff from my kids all the time. They come home from school and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. But I actively learn things all the time, and I read a lot. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. So my main ethos is to always be a student, never stop learning, right? But also, when I put myself in a situation, whether it be in a one-to-one situation or a group setting, so there's two ideas. There's two things that I come with. What am I learning here, or what value can I add?
Yeah.
I never come with the thought that what can I get out of this? Because if I'm coming with that's a selfish thing, and that's probably only gonna be that one interaction. I look for longevity, and I look for synergy. By adding value where you go, it's an energy source. Value goes round in circles. The more you give, the more you get. Even if it's still add value, and it doesn't have to be monetary or even time. You could compliment someone on something, or smile, or just you don't know. You can add value to hundreds of times. And I journal, so I basically write down all of the things how I feel that went well, and what it's a gratitude journal. So what am I thankful for? And most of the things I'm thankful for involve doing something for someone else.
So from what I understand, your business that you started up, it's doing well by helping in a good way. And what the studies have shown is that no matter what type of business industry or what type of perception they have, so whether it is like an oil company versus something like what you're doing, or even, a low profit helping the elderly type organization, right? At all scales of industry, the perception is that profit in a company is tied with being less socially responsible, and it's an incorrect perception,
Completely.
but it is the case,
Yeah, of
right?
course. On the surface, it makes sense, right?
Yeah, because it's the idea that, say if you suddenly start to overcharge with your goods, right? Or if you're undercutting in terms of quality. And that's how it's seen from the individual consumer's view, right? Because what I may buy, I see that product as something that's gone up in price. So I'm losing out and the end person is benefiting. That perception, even after studies are shown, that perception still holds. How do you deal with the fact that what you're doing is ultimately almost at the epitome of being socially responsible, because you're trying to drive awareness and the future of better environmental health with, do you ever face any pushback or conflict of how can you also be making a stellar growing business while also doing something that's considered?
I mean, the pushback conflict, a lot of times comes from within me.
Wow. Okay.
My ethos in business is, like, really simple terms, is to add value. And because when I first started the business, the first 2-3 years, it was about profits. Obviously, as a business owner, I'd be silly not to look at the profits, right? And budgetary, planned budgets, etc. But that's not my main focus. My main focus is to add value to individuals, to partner with them, to give them the best experience. By that, the profits go up. But if I'm looking at the profits and that's my focus, then actually they're not going up as much. the profits, obviously, as I say, I do obviously watch as a business owner, because then it makes me plan ahead. I have forecasts, I have projections, and I have goals that I want to achieve financially. But my goals, when I achieve them financially, I know that, okay, this will enable me to help this, or this I can put back into the business. This will enable me to be able to do these things around the environment usually. So my profits have shot up when I've stopped actually focusing on the profits, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, everything that you've talked about legacy, that's really when I thought that we are connected in terms of how we think, because even for me, it's this idea of leaving something behind that wasn't here before me, but it doesn't need to be recognized by my name at any.
You want to leave the world in a better place for future generations, and that's what the environment ethos is about, really. Anyway, right? So whether you want the next generation to have a better planet than we've got now.
Yeah, it's amazing, and you're doing all the right things to make it happen. And
there's still a lot more I can do, a lot more. I'm on a journey, and I'm not anywhere near where I need to be, but I'm a lot closer than I used to be.
Yeah, and you're bringing people with you, and that's what I love to see it. And I think you're doing amazing things, and I cannot wait to see how it grows. So yeah, it's been a true honor. I've learned.
Thank you so much.
A lot more about why you are the way you are, and I'll be following your journey. Cannot wait to see the world be built. And we just have a final closing tradition on this show where I ask you 2 questions that I've selected from a list of questions that have been provided as I built up from the previous guests. So question number 1, if you could change the course of history of your previous generation's journey, and it can go back multiple generations if you want, would you do so?
I wouldn't change it, because it's made me who I am today, and it was part of their destiny. However, I'm in touch with my ancestors and spiritually, the ancestors' journey. So I try to sort of feel, because things are passed on through generations, good and bad, right? So the epigenetics can change because of circumstances and trauma that each generation experiences. So it's now, if you're aware of it and you actually embrace it, you can then change that. You could be the change to then prevent it from passing on to further generations.
Wow, yeah.
So if I change things, I may not be here, or I may not be the person that I am today. So no, I wouldn't.
And what was that? It was called epigenetic.
Absolutely.
Never heard of that. That is fascinating. So you're saying that you can sort of almost...
You can, your DNA, your genetics can be altered by something that you experience. For example, the Ugandan expulsion.
Yeah.
That would have then have had an effect on my parents, therefore had an effect on me. My children have never experienced or don't even know about it, but it would be passed on to the generation. This trauma, this hurt will be passed on.
And can that be positive as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, so it can be positive and it can be negative. So, but then you just have to be aware of it.
Wow, yeah, I love it. And the final question, if you had to pass down one piece of controversial advice, something that may not be accepted or understood by the general mass of people, what would that be?
Controversial advice is like, as a parent, I want the best for my children, but is that really what's best for them? And my parents always wanted the best for me, but was that really what's best for me? So you've got to be able to. I think females are better at it than males, but learn to read your own body and your own signals and signs from the universe, and be more in touch with what's going on around you.
Amazing. Ketan, thank you so much for this. I look forward to looking back on this in a year's time.
Thank you.
And just, see how much of a difference you carry on making year by year.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me as a guest, and keep inspiring.
Thanks so much.